Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to Ghost in Depth. In today's episode, we're going to be testing the thermal sight and seeing if it actually does reduce recoil or not, because that is a very popular myth, rumor, whatever you want to call it in Call of Duty Ghosts, that the thermal sight in some way reduces recoil, improves accuracy, reduces kick, however you want to say it, that it's a major benefit to your gun, not just for being an optic. There is a coding basis for this that we're going to discuss, there is a feel basis for this that we're going to discuss, and I'm going to be doing a lot of testing both in the episode. I'm going to put all of my test at the end of the episode, kind of like an appendix, as if this were an actual research paper. Number one thing I want to discuss is that many people think that the thermal sight reduces recoil. Just that in itself is a very powerful placebo effect that can actually change your performance. If you don't know what the placebo effect is, please do take the time to research it. And that due to its zooming effect and how it zooms in and how it changes the way that your gun sounds, the way it looks, the way it shakes, and the way it feels, it may very well give you a very different feel for your weapon, and it may feel that it has a different amount of recoil, so that can also affect how people handle the weapon. Now let's skip over to the tests on the thermal sight. I'm going to be testing it with two very popular weapons today. I'm going to be doing the Remington R5 and the MTAR X, one with no attachments and one with the thermal sight. I did other attachments with other weapons, red dot sight and thermal, a lot of other weapons. Those are going to be at the end of the episode, but first I just wanted to show these two because these two do more or less summarize my results. Now my first pattern here that I got seemed to indicate that the thermal sight was in some way a little bit more accurate, had a tighter spread, it was more vertical, and that's something that you're going to get to see repeated over and over again. I'm going to tell Sparta and V to move out of the way, and I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to shoot this truck at a different range so that maybe we get a bigger or better visual spread. Going to step over to the right at the exact same range and shoot with the thermal sight, and what you see is that it has this very vertical pattern with a few horizontal offshoots, more like a tree and less like a blob. The other ones look like small anchors, whereas the thermal sight ones are very, very vertical, and this was kind of confusing me, so I'm going to step back and I'm going to do it one more time just to make sure that I'm not losing my mind here, that there are some sort of recoil properties at work, because I was really not expecting it. One thing I did want you to notice there is that the first three shots of that Remington R5 were pretty much dead center and they didn't move at all. However, the overall accuracy differences were small. On that third test, you saw that it actually kicked more than the standard iron sights, though the pattern was different. The MTAR X, I actually got the most interesting results out of every weapon. All of the other weapons came up either inconclusive or slightly different pattern, or the recoil would be different, but not necessarily better or worse. The patterns would be very similar, and due to the very random nature of recoil, now there's a huge difference right there, but as I was about to say, due to the random nature of recoil, you need a lot of samples to get good data and say one way or the other. As you can see, my second go with the MTAR didn't kick nearly as vertically with iron sights. It stayed in a pretty good cluster over there on the left side. Matter of fact, it merged with the one beside it, so I'm going to do it one more time with the thermal sight, and we're going to see what we can see. And again, we get an almost replica pattern. I didn't even need to look at it too much, but I'm going to look at it for your benefit. So we got one awful spray pattern with the iron sights, and the other three were very, very similar. So I'm going to move over to this truck because these are the best things to test on. They just have a really nice flat white surface. It's very easy to see the gunshots. I'm going to do it one more time just for your benefit and for mine, and what you'll see is that it's not necessarily more or less accurate, but it does make a different pattern, which could change the way the gun feels. As I said before, there is a code basis for this, there is a reason for this, and I want to start off with the fact that seems counter to the fact that I just said, that there is no coding basis for thermal sight recoil reduction except that it changes the amount of idle sway. It cuts idle sway in half, and that is an extremely minor component of kick or recoil or thus accuracy, but it's still a component. Idle sway is essentially when you aim down sights with your weapon, after something like half a second, a quarter second, your soldier will start to breathe and your sights will bob left, right, up, down. They'll just sit there and bob just a little bit, and because it is actually changing where your red dot or your iron sights are, it is also affecting the recoil. This is by far the most minor component of recoil other than center speed and gun kick and view kick and all these kind of things, but it does have a tendency to drag your shots off target. And because the thermal sight reduces your idle sway, it does have a very minor effect on recoil, thus reducing it. Also, the sight could possibly affect frames per second. While I was shooting this, it felt to me, and this is subjective mind you, that my Remington R5 was shooting slower with the thermal sight than it was with anything else. For some reason, the game doing the double rendering was using more processing power and thus rendering me less frames per second than it would be if I was using a red dot sight. And thus, every single thing could change. As we've discussed in previous in-depth episodes, the game thinks in frames and frames per second. When you change your base frame per second measurement, your weapons will fire slower, you will run slower, you will lag more, you will lag less, you will do a lot of different things. And if your weapon is firing slower, of course, it's going to have a different recoil pattern, so it can change. I do not believe that this is a large effect, and I'm not saying that, you know, oh, thermal sight just wrecks your FPS. That's not true. It was a very, very, very subtle change. It was so subtle that when I went back in Sony Vegas and I tried to edit for it and test for it and see if I could prove it, I came up with something that was just not significant. I got numbers, but they were just not significant numbers, so I'm just going to have to rely on my feel for that one, which is not exactly what I wanted to do. And another fact that I need to mention all the way back, going back to MW2, for whatever reason, none of the people on Dinkerson that I'm aware of know why or anything, but I have seen it before. The engine does do slightly odd things when you're using different sights. The gun will just, for whatever reason, not perform exactly the same as it does with iron sights, as it will with red dot sights, as it will with an ACOG, as it will with an EOTech. Different games had different reasons. Some had, you know, plus or minus center speed, but even just the different optical sight, like iron sight and red dot sight, it would do a slightly different thing for an unpredictable reason. And this is not something that I know why it does or how it does, and it's very, you know, well, you really see it more in older Call of Duty games than these, but that is a possibility. So at the end of the day, mathematically speaking, the thermal sight does affect recoil, but it should be about a 1% or less reduction. It's very similar to the foregrip in Black Ops 2, which, as we all know, was a placebo and did not work, but it can change the way your guns work because it does change the idle sway. It should not change as much as it does. However, because of how the engine works, because of the frames per second, and because this is Call of Duty, which we all know is not a super predictable game, it is very possible that some guns benefit more than others. As much as I love hard numbers, and I love to give you good data and tell you what's awesome and what's not, the best that I can tell you in this situation is to trust your gut feeling. If it's comfortable for you, if you like it, if you think it does better, if you think it does worse, just go ahead and use it. Do what is best for you, because unfortunately I can't give you a perfect numerical recommendation today, but I do hope that you learned something useful in this episode, something that you can take home, carry with you throughout Call of Duty games, and continue with your attachment selection. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. The previous episode was about the tack knife and about some IED nerfs. You can click the box on the left, that'll open a new window. The next episode is going to be a funny one. It's going to be about the undermount shotgun, going to be a blasty blast. Again, subscribe if you want to, and all of my additional testing with this particular setup is going to be attached at the end of the video. Drifter out.